Hey, good evening. Welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, for those who have seen lots of our other videos, you'll know that this is what I would call late night meandering, and I wanted to touch on quite a few things. I have the luxury of being able to do this, and my meanderings can be very, very short, because you can click the next button, can't you? You can just go on to next. You don't have to listen to any of it. But sometimes listening to the way that life has evolved for somebody else can be a help. It has for me. I've found that when I listen to, say, at one time I used to be very interested in survival stories where the person against impossible odds has survived. One of my favorite stories was Adrift. It was a story of someone who was wrecked at sea. I've forgotten exactly how he came to be adrift in a boat and towing in a life raft and towing a small boat behind him. But anyway, it was either a whale that had banged into his boat, or he may even have wrecked himself on a floating cargo container, which sometimes they can fall off those container ships and then they float and partly submerged and they're deadly. Anyway, the guy was at sea for somewhere between 3 and 4 months, and in the end he gave himself up. He gave himself up to the sea. He, at one point in his story, he says, "I just thought the sea owns me now." Words to that effect. Of course, he wrote the book, so obviously he was eventually recognized and he was rescued. And they were actually amazed at the condition that he was in, because he'd learned to be able to fish. He learned to be able to eat raw fish, turtles and stuff like that, and did amazing things. And finding out how his life evolved at sea, when he was passed many times by huge ships that didn't even see him, and then finally somebody saw him and he was rescued. Well, you know, for me and my life, I went into the army when I was 15 and a half to be exact, and I signed up for 6 years. What was made very light of by the recruiting sergeant that I remember now, after I'd signed, he said, of course, it's not a big problem, but the first 2.5 years won't count. Wow. I was going into the army, and actually at that point in my life, as a 15-year-old who knew everything, it didn't seem like a big problem to me. Well, for the first year of being in the army, I kept waiting for it to get better, as I knew it would. Well, when you're 15 and a half, you know these things, don't you? It came as a shock after about a year, when I had to sit down and say, you know, it's not getting any better. Well, at that time you couldn't get out, so I was in for the 8.5 years. Well, as life unfolds, I did get some incredible training and I became a musician. I'd actually joined my father, unbeknownst to me. I guess he must have seen me coming home from what was to be my job, which was a coal miner. I came out of the army. I came out of school at 15, and for a few months I had a job in a clothing factory, and I did a little bit of sewing with some tuition on the machine, and then that was only for a very short time, and then I went into training for being a coal miner. I was supposed to start a job at what was then Bradford Pit. I suspect there is no Bradford Pit anymore, but back then there was a Bradford Pit. I never showed up for that job because, as my father later revealed to me, he had written to the bandmaster of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who were advertising for youngsters to go in and receive a training in music, no experience necessary. And he knew that I loved music, and so he'd written to the bandmaster and said, would you take my son? Of course, fresh meat on the block, they were delighted to take me. I went along and did the test. Back then you needed probably only the IQ of a dining room chair, and you were in. so I went into the army, and I went in as a boy soldier, and this is how life unfolds. I went in as a boy soldier. I actually wanted to play the trumpet, but I was told as soon as I got in, as you are, you don't go into the army and say, I want this. You go in and say, can I? And they say no. Anyway, because I'd been sent to this a made-up boys' school. It was not a school. It was a group of kids that were from various different regiments, all under the age of, if I remember rightly, all under the age of 16. Just a load of kids all in the same barrack room, with one corporal with a very mean streak. And I quickly learned about life in a situation where you have no choice but to do as you're told. I was sent later to Aberdeen, and I served. That was in that particular spate. I went to Stirling Castle, and I stayed in Stirling Castle, which was an incredible experience for a few days, and then I got used to it, as you do. And then I was sent to Edinburgh for a very brief period, and then on to Aberdeen, and I believe, was it Dreghorn, maybe, all very long memories now, which are very hazy for me. They're all in cotton wool by now. Anyway, I did get some good tuition. I made it clear that I wanted to be a trumpet player, and they made it clear that I wasn't going to be. So the guys in, all of the other kids in Edinburgh had said, hey, you know, if you can't be a trumpet player, why don't you be a trombone player? Not the G trombone, the tenor trombone, which was news to me. I didn't know there was a difference. That was how little I knew. So I said, well, I'll play the trombone, and they agreed to that. And it turned out that I had an aptitude for that, and things went very well. Well, after that, I went to, let me see, I was in Germany for my 16th birthday. I remember that. And then I think I was sent to Aberdeen. I think that's how it worked out. So all of this was very formative for me, and I was learning very quickly that the army is unlike the. Let me tell you, it's not like the advertisements. It's not like that, which was quite a shock to me. But anyway, I went in and I did my time very reluctantly. I served in several regiments. I served in. I saw a very moving story about someone who in 1914, this was on Facebook, and he was in the Manchester Regiment. Well, for a while I actually transferred into the Manchester Regiment for a very good reason. I thought that the Manchester Regiment, I would be near to home. I'd almost be able to live at home. Not so. It didn't work out that way. Very soon after I joined the Manchester Regiment, it was amalgamated, which was joined up with the King's Regiment, which was from Liverpool. And so it became the King's Regiment, Manchester and Liverpool. And I was, let me see, I did a year at the Military School of Music at Twickenham, and that was the best time for me. I really had some great tuition from the principal trombone of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, who I absolutely worshipped. Just a brilliant player and a brilliant musician. Learned a terrific amount and worked very, very hard, and so was very fortunate there. He actually told me that if I could get out of the army, if they'd let me go, then he could get me a scholarship at the Royal College of Music in London, which I tried for, but they said no. So that was it. Then I went to Africa. Well, it wasn't all so bad as soon as I got out, but I got out after 8.5 brutally served years, and I became a musician. And then of course it got into all of the music is where you're fighting for, if you're a professional musician, it's where you're fighting for recognition and fame and fortune. I started singing, and which was a long held goal for me, and did well. Well enough. I was in a very, very small way well known or well recognized. I worked in the same band, the Ray McVeigh, which is no great success story to have worked in the Ray McVeigh orchestra and singers, but I served some almost as much time in that band as I did in the army, and it was out of all of the bands that I worked with, except my own, it was probably the most rewarding. All of that time I was focused on myself, and the lesson that I'm trying to share that I learned over time is that the more that you are focused on yourself, the less likely you are to be fulfilled. Now this is only in my experience, but if you're out there and you're struggling for recognition in a field that does not reward its workers easily, which certainly is music and the entertainment business, then you need to assess whether you're really doing what you want to do. Now, it came as quite a shock to me reading that many of the greatest artists or artistes in the world actually would have preferred to be something else. So you got great opera singers who were at the peak of their profession, and they would have preferred to have been, say, a painter or something like that. And somebody who was a brilliant flute player would have liked to have been an actor. And all of this kind of thing that people can sometimes stumble on a great success and actually not particularly value it. Well, the trombone came easily to me. I just didn't have to work at it, and yet it wasn't what I wanted. So it's kind of haunted me for all of my life. It's haunted me. I keep going back, and it's something that I can go back to, and after a few weeks of a sore lip, while I'm getting my lip muscles tuned back in and toned up again, I suffer a little, but it's very easy for me to go back to it. I did buy a trombone while Beth and I were out in Tagbilaran once. We happened, purely by accident, to walk through one of the malls there. I think it was Alturas, and it turned out that they had an extensive music department. So I said, let's just go see if they've got such a thing. And they did have a trombone, a Chinese trombone, and I was amazed to learn that it was only 8,000 pesos. 8,000 pesos, it's just, it's a few $100 is really what it amounts to. So I said, I think I'd like to buy this, with Beth's agreement. We agree on all money spent. Sure. I would have been so embarrassed to try that trombone that I don't think I even blew any notes on it at all, maybe one or two. And then I said, 8,000 pesos at the time, we were okay for money, so I bought it, and I've never played it since. I cleaned it, got it to work as well as I could do. It's a cheap Chinese trombone, and there's no joy in it for me to play, because I'd always been rather fortunate and played fine American trombones. The king trombone is the king of instruments, even though the Japanese now make beautiful trombones and brass instruments. But the king was always the one for me, and I'd always had beautiful instruments. So playing that cheap old clanking trombone that's out there now has not proved to be much of a draw to me. But during my whole time as a musician and working hard at it, learning to do what I did, and then trying to do it to the best of my ability, I always loved singing. You can hear me singing at a professional standard. If you go and look through our videos, there's a few songs. There's one called Masquerade, on which I played the trombone to a fair standard, not up to the professional standard that I used to be in, but it was professionally recorded, and it's not bad. I also recorded Danny Boy on vocals, and another semi kind of like classical that I picked up from somebody else that had recorded it, and I learned it, got it transcribed, and with piano accompaniment I played Jubilate Dormum. So if you want to hear, just even though you've never done me any harm, you can go and listen to my singing on that. So there's always that you can go back to. But the point I'm trying to make is that kind of work is very much about self. You're trying to make yourself well known, because that means that you will earn more money. It means that you will be hired to do better work. You will be paid a better rate, and all of that. Now, I quit playing and singing when I came to the Philippines, because the places that you can go and play are all only karaoke, which is pure torture for me, for one reason and another. So I tend to stay away from that. It's usually, karaoke here in the Philippines is usually abused by having the volume at a blistering level, and I always come away with my ears bleeding, metaphorically speaking. So I tend to stay away from that. So I didn't really do anything and haven't done anything since I came to the Philippines, which is almost 7 years. So things started to change when Beth and I decided that we were coming to Bohol. Actually, the reason for coming to Bohol at first was that we were going to come and live cheaply, save money, and then travel. And we had thought, as I've said many times, that we might go to Panama. We were going to Panama because it's like a dollar economy, and it was owned and run by America, hence the Panama Canal, and so it was a place that felt like it was good, and from what I read, it was kind to retirees, which of course I am. Well, that got dropped by the wayside when we started to see that there was such a need for getting help to people who were almost living without hope. Now, it's very easy to judge people for being either lazy or not having any ambition, or all of these judgmental things that we think about them, simply because they're not successful. And that's where my prior Western attitude, especially from a musician, as I've explained, were very focused on success because it means so many other beneficial benefits. And at first I'm thinking, well, why don't they get a job, and why don't they do this, and why don't they do that? And I realized after a while how completely overwhelming poverty can be. It is totally overwhelming. The person is almost drowning. We saw so many people. I mean, that one of the things that stuck out the most was we just purely by accidental meetings that led to another meeting that led to another meeting. We actually met a woman who was well into her 60s that was supporting two young girls, one of whom was her granddaughter, and the other one someone that she had just taken in and helped. And her job was working with a hammer at the quarry. And at the quarry, her job was to break up boulders that was this big and bigger into pieces of what would be termed gravel, which were only this big. And she worked with a hammer like that all day, which made me feel quite humble. And things changed after that. Maybe not then, but I started to think in terms of serving others, because I dropped the idea. I no longer thought in terms of being a professional anything, musician or anything, and now I had the wherewithal, the finances, however modest, to be able to live without having to seek paying work. And we started to do things simply because it was helping others, and I learned such a lot from Beth on this. Beth would give more for something that was done for us, a service, getting a tricycle or a taxi or something like this from someone who, tricycle driver, have to work very, very hard for the very modest income that they earn, and she would pay more. And if I said, well, maybe you shouldn't do that, and she'd say, think of it as helping. and we gradually got more into helping, and we did this unconditionally for no return. And suddenly life changed, and it changed dramatically. I had a few experiences which I didn't actually process correctly at the time. I did sometimes. I remember a quote once said, "Pay attention to how you are feeling, because you may look back in retrospect in a few years' time and you'll realize that you were much, much happier than you recognized." So I tended to miss some important milestone things. And one of them was that Beth, which I only recognized just today, funnily enough, and I said to Beth that it was a very important moment in my life, which I only processed nearly 7 years later. She took me to a church that was a Foursquare gospel. Not that that matters. And for the first time I listened, fortunately, to the daughter. There's quite a big church, quite a fair congregation at the service that we went to, and the daughter of the pastor took a section of the service and she sang beautifully, and she sang obviously strongly Christian songs, which I've not learned. I've learned to recognize, it would be the right way to say it, since. And back then I just remember being emotionally touched for maybe the first time by something that was religious, because I never felt strongly in a positive way about organized religion, and I'd always kind of shunned it. And then I found, here I am in a church with obviously organized religion, and I am being moved by it. Well, if you fast forward to the present and even the recent past, Beth and I both agree that serving others is more fulfilling than any of the recognition that I had as a musician and a singer. We used to play in the bands that I played in. We played to quite large audiences, not the massive stadiums. We're not talking 20 and 30,000, but we are talking about 3,000 and 4,000 people, which is nerve-wracking enough, and is recognition enough when you are recognized by an audience that is at least that big. And I'd had that, so I'd had what Andy Warhol called, he said everybody in the world gets 15 minutes of fame. Well, I'd certainly had more than my share of 15 minutes of a kind of fame. So here I am, and I'm not recognized by audiences anymore, and yet I'm feeling more fulfilled. So I guess what I'm really trying to get over is that sometimes you have to go along with what your gut reaction, what your heart tells you to feel. You have to, let's face it, the challenge in our lives, that always used to be the cry, of mixed up kids, mixed up teenagers was, I don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here, and that's the cry of almost everyone who is on some kind of religious path, to find out what your mission is. And that's the big thing. If you can find out what your mission is, you are being told. Divine intervention is the divine is trying to intervene and tell you what your mission should be. I'm convinced of this. And we're just not listening. Sometimes I complain to Beth. She's trying to do something on the computer, and I'm trying to explain to her what my plans are, and I've got little sketches and things that I'm sketching, thinking that she's looking, and she's not looking. She's and I say, "Oh, you're not even looking." She says, "I'm listening. I'm listening." So it's almost as if the divine is tapping her on the shoulder and saying, "You're not listening." And of course, we think that we're listening, but it's a little bit like a badly tuned radio, where the more that you twist the dial, the more that this station comes on, and then that, and then this, and you get little fragments of messages coming through, and none of it is a coherent message. And we need to be able to focus and hear that in order to find out what our mission is. Now, I feel very fortunate that I found what I want to do. I'm finally, took me a while, didn't it? But I'm finally in that place where I'm doing what I want to do. Not fully, but I know the path. I'm on the path, and it's happening, and it gives me what I always sought in the wrong place, and that is fulfillment. And boy, if you can find a mission, if you can find something that you want to do so much that it fulfills you, then you've really hit the jackpot. That's worth more. It's worth more than money. And sometimes it's not what you think. I always leave you with this little anecdote of the young man who wanted to know what fulfillment was, what enlightenment. He sought enlightenment, which was the cry of every kid who ever wanted to find out why he was supposed to be here. And he climbed into the mountains where he knew that there was a guru, a wise man, a seer, someone who had found enlightenment, was enlightened. And he thought, if I can go there and talk to him, maybe he can guide me and tell me the answers. And he travels into the mountains, and finally he's getting close to where he knows, has been told, that the wise man lives. And then he sees this figure walking towards him, and he realizes that this must be the wise man, the guru that he seeks. The guru is carrying a load of what was probably firewood. He's carrying this load of firewood. And the young man humbly, respectfully says to him, "Sir, can you tell me what is enlightenment? How can I be enlightened? What does it mean? What will it be like?" And the guru, the wise man, throws his load onto the ground. So the young man takes that as, so this is enlightenment, the relief of the load. And then he says to the man, "Sir, what then?" The wise man picks up the load, puts it on his shoulders again. So sometimes I think, we seek divine intervention, we seek an answer, and as I've sometimes seen some of the Christian prayers on Facebook, "Dear Lord, thank you for giving me what I need instead of giving me what I wanted." Thanks for listening to my waffling on. Hope it was of some interest. Bye for now.